Welcome back to another Magicka Mayhem tutorial video. In this one I want to talk about all the different ways you can play Magicka Mayhem. There are several different ways to play. The original kind of game of Magicka Mayhem was designed to be for families. It was a family that created it. Myself, Ken Erickson, I'm the dad, and my son, who's 10, Ethan, he's the kid, and we wanted to play it, make a game that we could enjoy playing with each other and with our whole family. And our daughter is 7, so we have quite a range there. And so we created Magicka Mayhem to have kind of a little bit of a random component to it, some silliness to it, a little bit of potty humor, some fun factors that way. But that doesn't necessarily appeal to everyone. That's going to appeal to families, especially if it's like parents and kids. But for the more strategic players, we wanted to make sure we had some really good gameplay elements there as well. And I think the game lends itself very well to some more strategic gameplay, but you might make some slight changes to the rules in order to accomplish that, which we've already kind of done for you. But if you actually like the silliness, the randomness, and you don't really care that much about strategy, just want to have a quick, fun, casual game, and it doesn't really require much of a learning curve, then you can actually go with something we call Maximum Mayhem, where you can just take those silly effects and just ramp them up to the very top and enjoy it that way. So I'm going to go over those different options, and you can kind of choose to play. However, first off, I would say try to play initially with the Spellmageddon gameplay rules. It's very simple, straightforward, it's easy to learn, and we kind of recommend that for anybody that hasn't really played before, and we also recommend it for younger players as well. That way you can kind of get a feel for the game and then see what you like, what you don't like, and then if you go, hey, I want more strategy, then you can go ahead and ramp up the strategy with the spell versus spell gameplay rules. There's a lot more deep strategy with that one. Or if you say, I'm not really into strategy, I just want it to be silly, let's make it even more crazy, let's have more potty humor, hey, that'd be great, then you can actually go with the Maximum Mayhem rules. So you kind of push it one way or another. And feel free to have your own house rules and change it up yourself. We've probably played with 15 different versions of the game, and we liked most of them, but we kind of had to settle for something that would be the most appealing for the broadest range of people, and this is what we came up with in terms of these categories, but feel free to change it up however you like, but we do recommend you start with the basics. So, Spellmageddon gameplay rules, simple, straightforward, easy to learn, that's kind of where you want to start. Spell versus spell, more strategic, definitely a little bit more of a challenge, takes a little bit longer to learn, and Maximum Mayhem is, instead of just flipping a coin and getting a Mayhem card half the time, you can get it all the time. Every single time a spell is cast, it gets mayhemmed. So that's where you get that kind of craziness on every single cast. Let's see. So let's go on and let's start talking about that a little bit. I'm going to assume you have read a little bit already about how to set up the game or watch one of the game setup videos. So we're going to kind of skip that part. But basically, you set up the game real simple. Draw the cards, 3 rule cards. 3 spell cards, and then 5 element cards, and then you get started from there. Then you also, at the beginning of your turn, you'll actually want to draw an additional 2 element cards and 1 spell card. And then from there, you have a choice. What we want to have happen is the game to go fast. We don't want you to have a bunch of cards in your hand and you can't do anything with them. So we developed an exchange rate, kind of where you can trade cards in for other cards to make a spell that's in your hand actually work, or make a spell, like a strategy that you have planned in your head to work down the road. So you can actually do an exchange rate. The exchange rate's real simple. We did a video on the exchange rate as well. I'd recommend you watch that, but it's real basics, real straightforward. You exchange 1-to-1 if it's element to element. It's 1-to-1 if you're exchanging spell for spell. But if you want to turn in a spell, you can also get 2 elements back if you like. Or if you'd like to get a spell, you can discard 2 of your elements to buy that spell, basically. So 2-to-1 for when you're going between elements and spells, and 1-to-1 if you're within the same class. So that's pretty straightforward. But make sure you pay close attention to that one. All right. So now, how do you actually cast the spells? There are 2 different ways to cast spells. We've shown you how to combine elements into spells. That's the core of the game. That's the biggest part. That's where most of the most powerful spells are. That's where a lot of the fun is, and that kind of thing. But there's also another kind of spell called a snap spell. So the spell card spells require a spell card. Funny it's named that way, right? The snap spells do not require a spell card. You can cast them in a snap. Like if you have those elements in your hand, you can make that thing happen. So basically it says here, the most powerful spells in Magicka Mayhem are cast using spell cards. The effects and requirements are clearly marked on each spell card. In the event that a card effect conflicts with the game rules, the wizards should abide by the text on the spell card and curse the idiots that wrote the rules. By the way, we're the idiots, my son and myself, so you feel free to curse us if it happens to conflict. And occasionally we run into where that does, but it's not very often, luckily. Now, that makes sense. We've talked about that a little bit already. But the snap spells are a little bit different. And this exists both in Spell versus Spell and in Spellmageddon, like we're talking about now. It becomes really important in Spell versus Spell. So we'll go into it in much more detail when we get there, because you can do all kinds of crazy stuff with the snap spells. They're real straightforward though in Spellmageddon. And it says here, no self-disrespecting wizard would be caught dead without a few trusty-dusty memorized spells at the ready. You don't need a card for these, you memorize them. You memorize them when you're back in wizard school, right? So snap spells are cast using 2 identical elements. So let's say 2 fire elements. That could come from 2 different cards, or it can come from the same card. But 2 fire elements could be combined into what's called a Raging Fire it'd be like a Raging Fire snap spell. So they can come from 2 different element cards, like 2 fire element cards, or from the same element card, and like 1 epic earth element card, which is equivalent to 2 earth elements. And then we have a quick reference that's included in every game. It's part of the rule cards that you'll have there, and I'll show you that in just a little bit. But the and it's, actually let's go to that now so you can get kind of an idea of it. So here's the snap spell quick reference. It's actually 2 cards. It's 1 card with the front and the back. So this is a quick reference. So if you combine 2 of these into the 2 earth, you get a baby boulder snap spell. And it causes 1 damage. Each of these snap spells will cause 1 damage in most cases. Or you can get a static stunner, which causes 1 damage. Now, what's interesting about this one is that if you have, and this is something you'll see more, in fact, I don't want to talk about it now, this will be more when we talk about spell versus spell. But each one of these will cause 1 damage. Static stunner, arcane arc, flickering flame, cold cube. So each of these just 2 of the exact same element. It goes on here. Now, water does not cause any damage. And it wouldn't actually, it wouldn't really be of much use in Spellmageddon, but it becomes very important in Spell versus Spell. Shoddy Shield actually is used in Spellmageddon, and that's where you could create a barrier. We actually had a video on this, and we discussed this at length in another video. But basically, if you combine 2 shield elements, you'll create a protective barrier that can protect a wizard from 2 damage, and you can actually build it up by adding other elements as well. You can look into that to get more detail. You can also do another snap spell called the Vitality Tonic, and that's basically 2 life elements combined together that can heal you for 1 damage. So the only one that really kind of breaks the rules a little bit is the shield. It creates a barrier that can protect you from 2, and then everything else is kind of 1. This one heals you for 1. All the rest of them cause 1 damage except for water. So, but the quick reference is there. You can pull it out, and it makes it real straightforward. Once you've done a couple turns of the game, it'll be very clear. Okay, so now after you cast your spell, one thing that makes a difference is that snap spells are not subject to the Mayhem roll. It's only if it's a spell card. It says right here, before any spell card spell. No, it doesn't say snap spell. It says spell card spell. So before any spell card spell is able to hit its mark, it must pass Mayhem muster. What's Mayhem muster? You have to flip a coin and find out if the spell gets to hit its mark, or if the target of your spell does a Mayhem card draw. So flip the coin, the target wizard. So I'm casting a spell at you, you get to flip the coin. And once you flip the coin, if it's, you could do heads or tails, however you like it, but if it's heads, then the casting wizard, the one that actually sent it, gets to draw the Mayhem card and see what happens to his spell, his or her spell. So you're the target, you get to flip the coin, but then the person that's casting the spell gets to see what happens to that spell. And then they have to read it off, obviously, to the group. And if it's tails, then nothing happens, no Mayhem card draw, you just do the effect that the spell was going to do anyway. So then the part of step 4 is record the spell damage, healing, or effect. And then the assembled wizards cheer, cry, laugh, taunt, or whine as appropriate. Hopefully loudly and with lots of laughing and cheerfulness, in there as well. Then what you do is after that spell has been cast, the spell card is discarded. The element cards are discarded, and the Mayhem card is discarded. So all that stuff disappears. You don't see it again unless you run out of cards and have to reshuffle them. But those are then gone. And then basically you just repeat steps 3 and 4 until the casting wizard has completed all chosen turn actions. Because you can cast as many spells as you have cards for during your turn. At step 5, the turn ends, and then your play will proceed to clockwise. Just continues around clockwise. And I think I mentioned a little before, is like with the maximum mayhem rules, you can actually choose if you want to, how much mayhem you want. If you're going for a more strategic game, you might go with maybe 1 mayhem card out of 6 spells that are cast. So we call that like maybe minimum mayhem. You could roll a die and say if it's a 1, we draw a mayhem card. If it's a 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, we don't draw mayhem cards. That'd be like minimum mayhem. or you can do maximum mayhem, like I said, where basically every single spell will be subject to a mayhem card draw, and what happens there. So you choose what you want. It's you play how you want to play. That's kind of what we really wanted to do with this. So that kind of is the absolute basics of how you play Spellmageddon. Basically the difference between Spellmageddon and the one we're going to go in the next video, which is spell versus spell, is how these snap spells work. These snap spells become very instrumental in how you play spell versus spell, and it can create some back and forth. Ethan actually liked to call this like a tennis match, where it's like you're bouncing spells back and forth. You can reflect spells back to one another. You can stop spells. You can make a blow up in their face. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff. But that all happens with snap spells. But it's a little bit more complicated. So I'd recommend you play some rounds of Spellmageddon first, and then after you've done that, you can go ahead and move on to spell versus spell. But I'm going to cover that in the next video. Feel free to watch that one. Thanks so much.